It starts with something almost everyone believes they can handle: a simple conversation, a few questions, a calm officer standing in front of you, speaking in a controlled, almost reassuring tone. And in that moment, most people think, if I just explain myself clearly, everything will be fine. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That instinct, your natural urge to talk, to explain, to fill the silence, can quietly turn into the most dangerous decision you make in that entire encounter. Let me ask you something. If you were stopped by police right now, would you talk your way out of it, or accidentally talk your way into something worse? Think about it for a second, and if you're honest, drop your answer in the comments. Because what we're about to uncover isn't obvious, it isn't intuitive, and it certainly isn't something most people are ever taught. In fact, it's something many only realize after it's already too late. There's a reason trained investigators often say that the most valuable evidence doesn't come from forensics, fingerprints, or surveillance footage. It comes from people talking, and not because they're guilty, but because they think they're helping themselves. Imagine a completely ordinary situation. You're driving home. You get pulled over. The officer asks a simple question. Do you know why I stopped you? It feels harmless, almost polite. Most people respond instantly. Maybe I was going a little fast. I didn't see the sign. I think I missed the light. What feels like honesty is, in many legal systems, effectively an admission. No pressure, no interrogation, no raised voices, just a conversation. And yet, in that moment, the dynamic has already shifted, because law enforcement officers are trained not just to listen, but to interpret, to analyze, and to document. Every word you choose, every hesitation, every attempt to explain yourself becomes part of a narrative, and that narrative may not be the one you intended to create. Now here's where it gets more complicated. Most people assume that if they're innocent, talking can only help them. After all, what do you have to hide? But innocence doesn't protect you from misinterpretation, and it doesn't protect you from contradictions. Let's say you're asked where you were earlier in the day. You answer casually. Later, you're asked again, maybe phrased slightly differently. Your answer changes, not because you're lying, but because memory is imperfect. Suddenly, there's a discrepancy. And in an investigative context, discrepancies don't look like human error. They look like deception. Have you ever told the same story twice and realized small details changed? Most of us have. In everyday life, it doesn't matter. In a police interaction, it can matter a lot. This is where psychology quietly enters the room. When people feel nervous, they tend to talk more. They over-explain, they add unnecessary details, they try to sound convincing. Ironically, those very behaviors can make them appear less credible, because from an investigator's perspective, too much information raises a different question. Why is this person trying so hard to explain? And that question alone can shift the direction of an entire interaction. Now consider another scenario. You're completely innocent, but you mention something unrelated, something you think is harmless. Maybe you say you were in a certain area earlier. Maybe you mention a friend's name. Maybe you casually bring up a detail that seems irrelevant. What you don't realize is that investigations often rely on connecting small pieces of information. That one detail might link you to a place, a person, or a timeline that becomes significant later. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you introduced it into the conversation, and once it's there, it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the record. There's also something called confirmation bias, a well-documented psychological phenomenon. When someone forms an initial impression, they naturally begin to interpret new information in a way that confirms that impression. This isn't about bad intentions, it's about how human cognition works. If an officer begins to suspect something, even subtly, your words may be filtered through that lens. And suddenly, neutral statements can take on a different meaning. Think about how easy it is to misunderstand tone in a text message. Now imagine how much more complex it is in a real-world interaction, under pressure, with legal consequences attached. There's another layer that many people don't consider. Silence feels uncomfortable. Most of us are conditioned to fill it. In everyday conversation, silence can feel awkward, even rude. But in a legal context, silence is not an admission, it's a protection. And yet people often break that silence not because they're required to, but because they feel they should. Let's pause here for a moment. If you were standing in front of an officer and there was a long pause, would you feel the need to speak? Or could you stay quiet? Be honest with yourself, because that moment, those few seconds of silence, can determine everything that follows. There's a famous principle in legal systems around the world. Anything you say can be used as evidence. But notice what that doesn't say. It doesn't say anything about what you don't say. And that distinction is critical. Now, this doesn't mean you should be uncooperative or disrespectful. There's a clear difference between asserting your rights and creating conflict. Professional, calm, respectful communication matters. But so does understanding the purpose of an interaction. Police officers are not having casual conversations. They are gathering information, and information, once given, cannot be taken back. There have been countless real-world cases where individuals provided statements believing they were helping clarify a situation, only to find those same statements used against them later. Sometimes it's a poorly phrased sentence. Sometimes it's an assumption. Sometimes it's simply too much detail. And once it enters the legal process, it takes on a life of its own. Let's explore something even more subtle. Memory is not a perfect recording. It's reconstructive. Every time you recall something, you're not replaying it. You're rebuilding it. That means even honest answers can contain inaccuracies. Under stress, those inaccuracies increase. Under pressure, they multiply. And when those inaccuracies are documented, they don't look like memory gaps. They look like inconsistencies. Now imagine being questioned about something that happened days ago, weeks ago, or even months ago. Would your memory be perfect, or would there be small gaps, slight changes, missing details? Those small imperfections can carry weight in a legal context. And again, not because you're guilty, but because human memory is flawed. Another important point is that questions are not always as simple as they seem. The way a question is phrased can influence the answer. For example, there's a difference between, "Did you see anyone there?" and "Who was there with you?" One assumes uncertainty, the other assumes presence. And subtle differences like that can shape how people respond. Most people don't analyze questions in real time. They answer instinctively. But instinct isn't always aligned with legal awareness. Let me ask you another question. When someone in authority asks you something, do you feel pressure to answer immediately? Most people do. That pressure doesn't come from force. It comes from social conditioning. We're taught to respond, to comply, to engage. But legal rights often exist precisely to protect individuals from the consequences of that instinct. And yet many people don't fully understand those rights, or when to use them. This creates a situation where individuals unintentionally place themselves at a disadvantage, not through wrongdoing, but through misunderstanding. There's also the issue of partial information. When you speak, you may only be aware of your perspective, but investigators may have access to additional information, evidence, statements, timelines. When your words don't align perfectly with that unseen information, it can raise concerns, even if your perspective is truthful. Because truth in isolation can still appear incomplete, and incomplete information can be interpreted in many ways. One of the most important things to understand is that communication in these situations is not just about what you say. It's about how it's interpreted, recorded, and later presented. Your words may be summarized, they may be written down, they may be recalled from memory. And in each step, there's potential for distortion. Not intentional distortion, but human interpretation. That's why clarity matters. And sometimes, the clearest statement is no statement at all. Now, this doesn't mean every interaction with law enforcement is adversarial. Most are routine, many are straightforward, but the risk lies in not knowing which situation you're in. And once you realize it, it may already be too late to adjust what you've said. So, what's the takeaway here? It's not about fear, it's about awareness. Understanding that your natural instinct, to talk, to explain, to cooperate, can sometimes work against you if it's not guided by knowledge. It's about recognizing that silence is not guilt, that restraint is not suspicious, and that careful communication is not avoidance, it's protection. Let me bring this back to you. If you found yourself in a situation where you felt the urge to explain everything, would you recognize that urge for what it is? Or would you follow it without question? Because that moment, that internal decision, is where everything begins, and often where everything changes. As we come to the end of this, there's something worth reflecting on. The legal system is complex. Human behavior is even more complex. And when the two intersect, small decisions can carry significant consequences. Talking feels natural. Silence feels unnatural. But in certain situations, what feels natural is not always what serves you best. So the next time you think about how you would handle a conversation with police, don't just think about what you would say. Think about whether you need to say it at all. And now I want to hear from you. Do you believe talking helps in these situations, or can it create more risk than most people realize? Share your thoughts, your experiences, or your perspective in the comments. because sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we have after we understand what's really at stake.